I certainly say, Madam Speaker, and I think Oregonians will agree with me.
Political bodies exist to secure responsible government and to execute the will of
Okay, well, welcome back to another episode of the Oregon discussion on government efficiency. And we're going over the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I want to thank everyone. Thank you for turning in. I have today Senator Todd Nash. Todd, thank you.
Thanks for offering to have me come down here.
Well, a couple of well-placed $20 bills with me today. I got your position in that chair, and I want to say to others, take Todd's example. I'm just kidding. So, Todd, your district?
Senate District 29. It's a large district, covers Northeast Oregon, North Central Oregon. There's 7 whole counties, 4 partial counties, and 40 cities.
It's a second largest Senate district, I believe.
Thanks for pointing that out.
I'm the first.
Yeah.
And but you're a rancher by trade.
I am.
And so this is appropriate. We're talking about ODFW today.
I have had a lot of experience with ODFW over the years.
All right. Well, I also have with me Representative Jeff Helfrich.
Thanks for having me on again.
Always a pleasure. So you're from Hood River, but your district?
My district goes from the Dalles Dam to the Sandy River into Portland Metro, cuts in to Gresham, goes to Highway 26, just skirts outside of when they redistrict, just take out Sandy, and then has the rest of Mount Hood, the rest of Clackamas that goes to Mount Hood, of all of Hood River County, and probably a quarter of Wasco County.
And you're an avid hunter?
I hunt, I fish, and I look at what ODFW has kind of become, and it's not managing wildlife, it's managing everything else.
Well, and we're going to talk about that, not just their mission, their budget, but how they're accomplishing some of their goals. And I'm Mike McLane from Senate District 30, which is Central Oregon, between Redmond, basically part of Redmond, up to Todd's district, including Madras, but all of Crook County, and then clear over to Idaho and Nevada and California. It's a big district, 43% of the landmass of Oregon. But we have here today the chair of the Oregon Young Republicans, Tanner Elliott, who's also working with Senator David Brock Smith.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And it's my first episode on the podcast. And as you know, I'm from Senator McLane's district originally, from John Day. So, growing up in the area, as Senator Nash would know, everyone in rural Oregon is pretty familiar with the issues that come with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and just how it's being mismanaged. And we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah, and you're from your family, the legacy of the Elliott families. You've been a ranching family and dealt with ODFW as well. And so you've done some research for us on this, and we sure appreciate it. So let's jump in. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, an agency of the great state of Oregon. And what do you got for us, Tanner?
Well, first, we're going to do game time. It's a reality check. So we're going to do about a bill that I think is a bad bill, and enjoy the photo of Michael Jordan. I just thought I'd add
Well, and I think that's the winning shot against Byron Russell's defense, where the Bulls prevailed on that shot. One of the great ones. Anyway, I digress. Go on, Tanner.
Yes. So today I picked House Bill 3489, and this bill is a major threat to the wood products industry. This would impose a new severance tax on timber harvested from public or private forest land. The act would repeal all current forest product harvest taxes, and the act would get rid of a lot of surcharge. The Emergency Fire Cost Committee and the Oregon Forest Land Protection Fund. The act would make changes related to the cost of fire protection and forest protection districts. The act would be referred for a vote at next year's general election.
Interesting. So this would have the net effect of raising the costs on severance tax.
Yeah.
Is that right? All right. So in the severance tax is when you cut a tree, you pay a tax. And our majority party wants to raise that cost. So I don't want to see the costs go up because our folks are having a hard time dealing with it anyway. But all right, let's move on to so what we're looking at here, next slide, is just really quick in the news, the wolf population surpasses 200 for the first time in 8 decades. And we're going to talk about Senator Nash's bill, Senate Bill 777, later in the podcast. But folks need to know that since Oregon made that decision to introduce wolves, it's impacting wildlife, it's impacting ranching, and now we have the highest wolf population in 8 decades. So success for the left who wanted to introduce them. Bravo. Consequence being borne primarily by the folks who live there. So the Oregon lawmakers are considering a 1% tax on hotel, camping, and Airbnb stays that would raise up to $30 million a year for state wildlife conservation. So once again, more taxes because, of course, conservation is needed for those wildlife that actually survived the wolves. We need some more money to help, I guess. And then last week, a commercial fisherman caught what ODFW officials identified as a Chinese mitten crab in the lower Columbia River. This crab caused significant infrastructure and ecological damage in and around San Francisco Bay in the 1990s. So it's an invasive species. And you talked recently on the floor of the Senate about the zebra mussel.
Yeah, the Esquagga mussel and the zebra mussel. Found them there in central Idaho in the Snake River and then in the Sacramento Delta, and extremely damaging. And to get rid of them, you actually have to kill everything there. There's a product that's a derivative of copper, and you put that into the water and it kills basically every species that's there. And so if we can keep that from coming our direction, it's very important to do that. Once it's here, it's just an absolute nightmare.
Well, and that's a good point. Tanner, I'm glad you brought that up because the Chinese mitten crab, and I don't know if we're supposed to say that because you remember the coronavirus and the whole dust up there, but for those who might be offended, that's actually the official name, the Chinese mitten crab. And it was called the Chinese mitten crab under the Biden administration. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe.
I believe so. All right.
That's what they named it.
I'm just, for those who are leaving comments that we're a bunch of racist Neanderthals, it's actually called the Chinese mitten crab, but it's an invasive species. So one of the roles of the Department of Fish and Wildlife is to address that. And so we're not advocating that ODFW doesn't do its mission. We want it to do its mission. We want it to be focused on its core mission. And that one of our advocacies here is to point out where they're off and the like. So, all right, good point. Let's go to the next slide. So here we are with the budget. So as you can see, from 2011 to now, there is a steady increase. And then by 2021, 2023, you can see significant increases. And now we're almost at 600 million, 596. Now that's the amount that the governor recommended. We'll see what the legislatively adopted budget is on Ways and Means. But, 600 million is real money. And like all agencies, significant increases. And I know from talking with folks that from the agency, they're saying, hey, we need more to do our mission. And because they've had to also comply with the 12 to 15 laws passed by the majority party, the Democratic Party in Oregon, under the leadership of Kate Brown and Tina Kotek, and raising the costs of the workplace and the cost of Oregonians. And that's also why some of our agencies are coming back and saying, hey, we need more money because, you raised our costs. They may phrase it different when they're addressing perhaps some other legislators, but decent increase. Next.
Going back to that slide, the North American model was set up so that the hunters and fishermen of that area with the species that they were harvesting, they paid for the taxes that paid for the management. And if we divert from that very far, there's less incentive to manage game in a sustainable way. There's less incentive to make sure that we balance out predators and make sure that we have a healthy mule deer and elk population that is two of our really keystone species that are in decline right now.
It's a good point. And you can see the budget Tanner broke out for us and where they are spending their $596 million, or at least in the proposed. Last time legislative adopted, 555 million, but you can see where it comes down into conservation, and they were at 8.6 million. So 30 million would have the effect of tripling their budget on conservation. You've got habitat resources and the like, wildlife management, and administration. So the administration alone is 83. They want to go from 73 million to 83 million. And debt load or debt service ascribed to them isn't that high. So generally not one of the agencies that is blowing up the budget, frankly. Next.
I was going to just add the point to keep an eye on 2021 and 2023. Those two totals. I'm going to do a compare and contrast with Idaho from 2022.
So this is just by the numbers.
Yeah.
1,763 regulations, which is in almost the equivalent pages. And decent amount of regulations. I'm sure every young hunter eagerly plows through those.
We hunt, we fish. We spend a lot of time outdoors, and teaching my son and my daughter to fish and sitting down with those regulations. You got to find them because they're not producing as many, but trying to get it online. If you don't have the information in front of you and what species, it could say this, you can fish in the Columbia River or the tributaries there, but then you have to find the special regulations that may be posted somewhere that aren't sitting at the site where you walk into, and you may be violating the law unknowingly. This is probably one of the most complicated places to hunt and fish, let alone figure out your points and where the units are at and everything else. But you can go over to Idaho, and it's a whole lot simpler to go hunt over there. And they're spending less money too for your stuff. Even into Washington, it's easier to understand the hunting and fishing regulations across the river. And you open up that rule book, and it's extremely complicated. And I think people get frustrated because of that.
Roger that. All right. So next slide. Okay. So take us through this, Tanner.
So this is the Department of Fish and Game. That's what they call their Fish and Wildlife in Idaho. And this is their 2022 and 2020 budgets. I couldn't find anything newer than that. But the total for the governor's recommended budget for 2022 was $178,600. And if we can go back just a couple slides to look at our 2021, 2023, $442,355,556. And then 2023,
555
million. Yeah, 555 million. Just compare that to Idaho at 128 million, and they have very similar populations to us with deer and elk and many other areas in wildlife. And it really just comes down to a question of why is Oregon so substantially different compared to our neighboring state that is just as much of a recreational state as we are.
I mean, four times. Our agency is 4 times higher, and generally equivalent populations of at least deer and elk. All right, I'm going to jump off because I have to make a quick call for my other job, and then I'll be back. And let me get back.
Can you roll back to the enforcement or go back to the Oregon where they use their enforcement? I just want to look at that. So this fiscal year 2022 was 12 million. And where are they at with our enforcement? State police, 36 million. No, but 31 million is where they're at for the same apples to apples.
Yeah.
It's incredible. It's doubled. A little more than doubled. And what are they getting for their enforcement versus our enforcement? Everything costs more in the state to do this, and it's ridiculous on how they run that organization. And you look at just at $25 million in 2025 for major constructions and acquisitions. What are they getting for $25 million? Where it's always been 2.5 million. They've kind of bounced back and forth. And Idaho, go back to the Idaho model. I don't know. Todd, I grew up in a farm and ranch in Nebraska. We had that, and we didn't have wolves, but we had a lot easier way of dealing with fish and wildlife, and they didn't come on your property and deal with stuff. What was the biggest frustration as a rancher when fish and wildlife came and did an inspection on your property, whether it was a stream or something like that, or just telling you how to manage your cattle?
Well, I really wasn't ever told how to manage my cattle, but there is stipulations within the Oregon Wolf Plan. If you want ODFW to go to lethal take on wolves, there are things that you need to do. There's requirements that you have to conduct non-lethal. You have to make sure there aren't attractants, carcasses, sick livestock, that sort of thing. And then you have to make sure that you're doing some sort of non-lethal activity, whether it's human presence, putting up flagery, noise boxes, fox lights. There's a number of things, range riders, and you have to kind of jump through all those hoops and do it in good faith in order for them to go to lethal control once wolves become depredators of your livestock.
So you have to prove you've done all that before they go shoot and kill the wolf that's probably eating your herd.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Yeah. You were very eloquent when you said that. I'm more straight to the point, very focused on that.
Yeah.
That's incredible because the population, some of those wolves that they've had problems with have gone to Colorado now. And so they've captured and reestablished them and relocated them to a safer area. But I guess the question of what I had with you to begin with was telling you what to do with your cattle, but do you have any streams and anything like that where they have come in and said you have to, these headwaters or these areas that your cattle could have access to, you have to fence that off so they don't come in and ruin the stream and things like that, where they've fish and wildlife have come in, nobody else, and they said, oh, you're hurting this frog.
Yeah. And so salmon, anadromous fish species, and anadromous fish are fish that go to the ocean, basically. They come back and spawn. They're
salmon, steelhead.
Salmon, steelhead. And so Chinook salmon, really one of the keystone species that there is a lot of emphasis on recovering. The thresholds on that where I was at, and I had one 10-mile stretch of creek that if you had one cow in there, you were in violation if you were in there past the 10th of August. And I can't pin all of that on ODFW. That was Forest Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. National Marine Fisheries were actually quite a lot worse than the state agency in this case. And to the point they were abusive and really wanted to boot ranchers off the ground.
So when you say ranchers off the ground, was that grazing cattle in U.S. forest ground, or was that?
Yeah, that was on Forest Service ground. On private ground, the restrictions weren't nearly as strenuous. It was more voluntary fencing off and that sort of thing.
And what if you didn't voluntarily fence it off?
If you didn't, it was completely up to you. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Because last year, my wife did the mentor youth tag, and my son shot his first elk. And there was elk herds that came in and would ruin a rancher's planted wheat out in the Doofer area. And we had a very robust conversation about Fish and Wildlife coming in, and there was a creek, and they had to double fence areas and keep the cattle ranging from there. And it was private property, so he only allowed certain people to hunt within the land. But one of the things he talked about was I have these elk herds that come through because they get pushed off the public land because of all the hunting pressure, and they get to hang out on my property and ruin my ground. But when they do come in, they're running and going through my fences, and then the Fish and Wildlife come in and say, "Oh, your fence is down," and they ding him for that, and because the cattle walk through the creek. And we want people to go out and hunt and fish, but yet it's his land, and they're telling him how he has to manage it. And it just seems like this overburdensome regulation. Big Brother's always telling you what to do. And that's just been my experience talking with ranchers and farmers out there. And we want to be good as, hunter, we hunt, we fish. We want to be conservationists. We want to protect our land and protect things. But at some point, when is there so much overreach? And what have you, before you became in the legislature, seen as overreach of the government? And just like, this is a nonsense rule that why are we having to put up with this? And who came up with this dumb idea?
Yeah. And, fish probably drove me to town before wolves did. And I go back to the fact that those federal agencies were way worse than a lot. And within ODFW, I'm going to give them credit where credit's due. Most of the local biologists were really decent individuals, really worked hard to try to get along with you. And I appreciate them. And on that local basis, they went to church with their neighbors there. You saw them in the grocery stores in the evening. Their kids were in the same softball as your kids, and that really makes a difference. But when you get to a lot of times that regional level or the state level, and they're in Salem and they're making decisions, or the state legislature's making decisions, that detachment there is where the problem comes in.
Do you think the way the commission was set up, and it was Portland-centric when it came to those commissioners on Fish and Wildlife that were charged with telling the director at the time, and the new director, this is how we want to go about managing and conservation, and that in the Portland-centric thought process, whether it's Thousand Friends of Oregon or whoever else has their tentacles in there and pushing that, how much did you see that Portland influence out in your neck of the woods? And those
it had a tremendous influence because, just a few years ago it was based on congressional districts.
Right.
And so it was, 5 congressional districts and then an east side person and a west side person. And we had at one time, there was an east side person, a west side person, and a congressional district, and they were all really within a few miles in the Medford area. But of a fairly liberal mindset. These are individuals that are appointed by the governor. They're the Senate approves
the confirmation process.
Yeah, through the confirmation process. It's one of the things that, as a senator, and I'm going to divert just a little bit, I've been a no vote on every one of the confirmations so far. These guys have tremendous rulemaking authority. And within ODFW, through that commission process, they have rulemaking authority that becomes law. Us as legislators are supposed to be the lawmakers. Anything that changes the law should be ratified by us. And we have enough struggles of our own, but at least we're elected. You're looking at a commission there that is appointed, can be run through this Senate process really easily. And it doesn't lend toward a healthy environment, in my opinion.
So to kind of recap what you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said what it used to be, and so we'll get to what it is now. So when you elect a governor, they then are charged with hiring department heads, unless it's through a commission style where the commission hires them, the government recommends. And then these other agencies, if you fit the mold of what that governor wants in their vision, they get hired. And then on these boards and commissions that the governor is charged with appointing people to, like-minded, not a very diverse train of thought when it comes to certain things. Diversity could mean one thing to one side of the aisle, where diversity to us means like having a bunch of different thought processes and how it looks and how you work through a process. And what you described there was centric to a core vision of, we know everything in the big city. You guys out in the smaller communities really don't know what you're doing, and we're gonna tell you how to do this. But yet they forget you're the ones that have to live there and do that. So talk about how the commission has now changed and how that process works from the congressional district.
So I think it was House Bill 3086.
And I voted for it.
Yeah, a few years ago, Representative Levy sponsored that, and and that bill changed that to watersheds, and so there's 5 watersheds.
Is it river basin or watersheds?
Well, you might.
I think it was river basin.
Yeah, could be. Yeah. But yeah, it distributes it a little more balanced throughout the state. You still have those 5, and then you have an east side and a west side. The problem with that still is you can find really liberal components in each corner of Oregon. You don't have to look very far. I did have a conversation with Governor Kotek when this rule came about. I said, I was a county commissioner at the time. I said, I really appreciate this legislation. I think it has potential to really balance this out. We as commissioners would like to have weigh-in on who gets appointed there, that it really reflects the values of those communities. And so we were assured that we would. We put some names forward. Apparently all those were rejected. I also requested to see the list of those individuals who had applied, and was forwarded at every effort. And I had a conversation with the governor about that, and said I was disappointed that it ended up like that. These people that volunteer for these commissions and boards, I really appreciate them. I don't want to be dismissive of those individuals that are volunteering to do that good work. But in order to have some balance, they have to have some support from their community, I think. I think that that's a component that is absolutely missing in this appointment.
Yeah. And I remember the original part of the bill was there was going to be caveats: lived in the community, worked, hunt, fished, whatever. There was connection to the land, connection to the resource, connection to wildlife. And I watched that bill progress through the House and talking to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and they were taking hit after hit after hit of their constituent base, their supporters, their people that they want to say supported them, whether it's Thousand Friends of Oregon or whoever was part of their group. I watched those colleagues across the aisle that wanted to do the right thing just kept getting beat up and beat up and beat up by their stakeholders, that they didn't want to lose control. And it's about control at this point. And then when you have the deck stacked against you, it's hard to actually get good policy across the aisle sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, some of these commissions have gotten political in nature because they have a vision and a thought that it's, well, we're here, we're going to do it this way, that's what we think it should be done. Well, you weren't elected, you were appointed.
Yeah.
Your advisory group.
Yeah. I will say, though, I will tell people it is worth hanging in there and going through the process. I went to nearly every ODFW commission meeting for 2 years straight prior to delisting wolves. And we did that through the commission. I can remember the date. It was November 9th of 2015. And but we told our story time and again, did it well, and had a lot of support. I don't want to make it sound like it was just me, but I did take that on as something that I wanted to get accomplished, and then the same way, probably the most challenging bill I ever ran through the state legislature, or was a part of, House Bill 4040, that follow-up year in that short session. We got that across the line, and that ratified that decision by ODFW. That's why we're delisted with wolves in the state of Oregon.
What's the line east-west for delisting?
Yeah, well, it should be right down 395.
That's what I thought. The number.
But as it is right now, it's 395, 78, and 20. And it's about a quarter of the eastern part of Oregon. And the reason why is we have that federal overlay. And the only reason that we're delisted in the far eastern part of Oregon is in 2011, there was an appropriation bill. And literally in the middle of the night, there was
state and federal level.
At the federal level, there was slipped into that appropriation bill that wolves will be delisted in eastern Oregon, eastern Washington, all of Idaho, and all of Montana, and no longer subject to judicial review. And that was the entirety of that. And that's been challenged several times in court, and it's failed. We basically did the same thing with House Bill 4040. It's been challenged twice in Oregon. The judge threw it out twice.
Who's challenging them?
The environmental groups, the same old ones: Oregon Wild, Cascadia Wildlands, Defenders of Wildlife. It's the same ones that show up every time that say that they want to help ranchers out.
The usual suspects.
Yeah, and then they show up, and anytime we have anything toward positive momentum for compensation, something like that, then they're there to object to it.
Yeah, they're the same people that say they want to help us, but when a push comes to shove, they do an about face. And just to go back about the the people that do that are in charge of agencies like Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, they're not elected, but yet they make decisions that impact so many people. And I can say that, the founding fathers never envisioned our government to be run that way, and never envisioned it for it to be this big also. But to see unelected bureaucrats continue to regulate our people, especially in rural Oregon, it has far more implications on us out there than it does on the citizens in the I-5 corridor.
So I want to go back to the wolf stuff just a little bit, because I know enough that I understand the problem. And like I said, I grew up in a ranching family. When wolves were introduced, did you have any of your herd that you had? Did you lose any cattle, or you may have known somebody that lost some? Talk about the loss, and some people, we'll just compensate you. But when you have wolves harassing your herd, you have wolves out there chasing you. The cows may throw calves, or when they are pregnant, they may throw the calf, or they're unable to get pregnant, and you're paying for your livelihood, and your livelihood's not producing to continue to replenish your cattle stock or your stock. Why don't you kind of walk about when it first was introduced, how the wolf changed the makeup of the herd? I'm not talking about elk or deer. I'm just talking about your cattle herd. That's how you make your livelihood, and they affected your livelihood and other people you know.
Yeah, well, when they were first introduced in central Idaho and into Yellowstone National Park in the mid-'90s, I was the least bit concerned. I had been around predators my whole life. I had raised cattle around predators and didn't think anything of it. I started hearing stories. One of my friends over in Idaho gave a presentation on what was happening with him, and he showed He lost 104 calves. And-
$500 a pop. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, and that's about what they were at the time. Casey Anderson was managing the ranch, and it was right across the Snake River from where we were at. And that's when it hit home that we were going to have some problems. And so when this was a really bad way, and I will hammer on ODFW a little bit on this, this was a really bad way to be introduced to wolves. I had some of the first depredations in Oregon.
Your personal herd.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in 2008 was the first documented litter of pups, and they were not far. I was in and around those. I did not know. They did not tell us that they had a successful litter. In 2009, they did tell us that there was a wolf out there. In 2009, I knew when I turned out that year that there were wolves in the area.
All right. So for people who don't understand what you mean by turned out, what do you mean by that?
Turned out mean I had some large tracts of ground.
Okay.
I was running cattle on about 90,000 acres between private and federal ground, a lot of it timbered, big, huge country, a lot of it really steep, canyon lands, the upper hills canyon breaks.
Mm-hmm.
And so really, really challenging ground to get around on. And so in 2009, I turned cattle out, which means I'd had them in an area close to the valley in Wallowa County, fed them hay all winter long. Turning out means they go out on grass, and they go out on these large landscapes.
Grass-fed beef, which is good for you.
It's grass-fed, yeah. So anyway, the direction that the cows were going to go with calves, I intentionally didn't put any dry cows out that direction. So sometimes I would throw a few dry cows, especially if they were young. They had lost a calf for some reason that wasn't necessarily their fault. I let them have another trip. In 2009, I didn't do that. I sent everything with a calf that direction. When I gathered up at the corral that fall, I was 20 head short. I was 20 calves short. Turns out they were telling me that there were 1 or 2 wolves in the area. They had good information that there were 10 wolves in that pack. It wasn't until later that fall, one of the local biologists actually got a video of the wolves in the pack, and there it was. There was the reality of it. Wolves go from a den site to a rendezvous site. The den site, when the puppies are little, they can't travel. The rendezvous sites are generally a few miles away, and those rendezvous sites, the parents and the subadults and the adults, they go out and they hunt from there, and then they come back to the pups. I didn't know it, but where I was summering some of those cattle was right there amongst one of those rendezvous sites.
So let me get this straight. You asked, they said, oh, we may have 1 or 2 in here. You learned that there was 10 in that area. You lost 20 calves. The government, a branch of the government, Fish and Wildlife, lied to you, lied to the citizens, concealed evidence of this under the guise of, oh, it's the wolf. We have to reintroduce this wolf. We have all our rules we have to play. We're worried. They made every excuse, but they turned around and lied to your face about, oh, there's still maybe 1 or 2 wolves here. But yet they want to hide behind these rules and regulations that they made, but yet they still weren't truthful to you. And that's, to me, that's where people have lost faith in the government, where they don't know what the truth is. And you experienced it firsthand.
I did. And that was startling to me. And one of the things that I've told people is I've sold hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of cattle over the years on less than a handshake. It was just something that we agreed on a price, and that was the way it was. Those are the kind of people that I dealt with most of my life. I dealt with, and this sounds a little silly, but I dealt with horses and cattle and dogs that didn't know how to be dishonest. And so when I dealt with an agency that was straight up dishonest, I was horrified, and I was really mad. And I wouldn't let it go. And so it was one of the things that drove me into town. It's one of the reasons I'm here now.
So define what you mean by drove you into town.
Well, all I ever wanted to be was a cowboy.
Yeah.
That was it. The abuse of what took place with the salmon issue and some of those federal agencies, and then later with wolves, I just couldn't believe that was happening, and I couldn't let it go. I was in a leadership role with our local Stock Growers Association there, and they were looking to me for leadership. There were other neighbors that were being impacted. So I found myself not only advocating for myself, advocating for my neighbors, and then eventually being asked to run for a county commissioner. But so that's kind of a long way around of that's what drove me to town. Otherwise, if I'd have been played fair with, I'd probably still be just out there chasing cattle around.
And so the good senator is going to join us back into this conversation. You heard part of it, but you had a state agency. Someone say, someone say, well, they didn't really lie. They couldn't provide that information. It's not like you're dealing with classified information like if you're in the military, it's top secret. These are wolves, four-legged critters that are killing your stock, and you got the taste of what it's like to be abused by the government, have the government lie to you, and now people wonder why there's the urban-rural divide and why half of Oregon's all pissed off at Salem and the government because they don't know who to trust. So, Mike, you got to jump in on this one.
Well, that's quite a segue into, or I should say not a segue. I guess I missed part of that. I had to do with my other job. I had a call I couldn't miss, but but I'm glad you're getting to tell this story because I've heard it from you, and I think Representative Helfrich expresses the sentiment of those who haven't gone through that once government burns bridges relationally, when it comes to you later and says, hey, we have a great idea, it's viewed with skepticism. And has that been your observation with those who are raising cattle?
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of times they don't talk plainly. And you were brought up in a rural area around cattle people, around farmers and ranchers. They talked really plainly. You didn't have to guess what they were saying. And the manipulation, some of the double talk, it's different with the state agency a lot of times. One of the things that I ran into when I got my first confirmed kill, I'd had other kills, but and again, I remember some of those dates. They just stick in your mind. But it was May 20th of 2010. I went out to check a pasture just because I knew there were wolves in the area. And just as I got there, I saw two golden eagles light on a calf. And so they were the tell that there was something there. Found the calf, still actually had a little body heat left in him. And you know, I was still naive, still at that point, still really trusting, even to the point that I looked at the calf and went, I wonder how he died. I wonder what took place here. And this isn't unusual. When I've given talks and wolf presentations in 3 different states and probably close to 30 or 40 of them, I suppose. And when I start showing slides and pictures of different events, I'll see ranchers nudging each other like, I saw that. But I'm looking at this calf, and all of a sudden, it was just like something washed over me, like kind of chill. And I realized this is different. You've never seen this before. This is a wolf kill. And so from that point, I called up the sheriff, I called up ODFW, Wildlife Services. They came out and did the investigation. 36 hours later, before ODFW finally confirmed it. And in that process and in that time, I was asking questions, just normal questions like a normal citizen would. What do you see in there? You know, and finally, on about that 35th hour, I had taken a break. I just stayed away, and they were literally checking this carcass over, investigating it almost the whole time. And I said, "Well, boys, do we have a confirmed kill here?" And I was still trying to be a little lighthearted about it. And I remember one of the guys said, "Well, I just can't tell you." And I said, "Why in the hell can't you tell me?" I said, "Did somebody take your First Amendment right away from you, that you're not free to talk to me? Because that seems like a bigger issue than a dead calf." And he got really mad. And as you know, I have sons in the military. One of them was overseas at the time. Another one was booting up to go overseas. And it wasn't a top secret mission. It wasn't challenging anybody's life it was really upsetting that happened. I blew up like I tend to do sometimes and got in my rig and drove home. And I got a phone call about an hour later, and somebody said, "Well, they posted your calf online and they confirmed it." They didn't even bother to call me first. So that was my introduction to wolves. One, they didn't tell me how many were out there when they had full knowledge of it. They weren't open and honest about what they were seeing in investigation. Our local biologist, again, he was there from the start and part of the investigation. One of the most trusted bios in the state of Oregon. He ended up with, I think, a 42-year career, and they put a gag on him to where they told him he couldn't talk about investigations anymore. And so those trusted individuals that we had in our community, they took their voice away from them. It was just a really bad way to be introduced to an agency.
Well,
I'd add that just goes back to what Ronald Reagan said. The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." So we compared the budgets between us and Idaho's, and something that Idaho's Fish and Game doesn't have that we do is their DEI policies and their DEI goals. And so did a little research about it. A 2022 ODFW survey asking 115 employees of how DEI could grow and the opportunity areas for the agency. Here were some of the answers. Increase and improve outreach to barbershops, salons, neighborhood eateries, people who are homeless, and diverse fraternities and sororities. Increase community resources and linkages. Develop more written materials for non-English speaking communities in Oregon. Sponsor or convene DEI workshops or training activities as it concerns culturally diverse groups. Incorporate art, reading material, or decor reflecting culturally diverse groups in the agency facilities. Sorry about that. Facilities. Images shared with news releases and on social media will better reflect the diversity of the state's population participating in hunting, fishing, viewing. Uncover culturally diverse community beliefs and practices regarding fish and wildlife conservation and outdoor-related programs and services. Uncover culturally diverse community beliefs and practices regarding fish and wildlife conservation and outdoor-related programs and services. Have a DEI metric included in staff performance reviews. promoting outdoor opportunities in locations and or communities that are underserved, particularly urban communities.
So Idaho gets it done on 25% of our budget. One of the things they don't spend money is on our state-mandated DEI programs, which so those were some of the suggestions of ODFW workers. All right, not a whole lot about wildlife there, but yeah. Do we know? I'm just curious. It'd be, do we know how much ODFW spends on DEI, which I suppose we can drill down and find out in their budget. But again, whether you are for the programs or not, that's how they're spending money, at least some amount, right? And the question viewers have to ask themselves, is that how you want money spent? Particularly today in this agency. And a lot would say no. Why is Idaho getting it done on a fourth of how we are? Anyway, next slide. So we're back to this bill by
This is Senator Nash's
Senator
bill.
Nash's bill, and I'm on that bill, but you must have a version that I don't see my name up there. Dang it, pre-session filed. Well, anyway, I'm on the bill, as are most, because I think a lot of us, once we got at least those who just joined the Senate got in, we put our names on it because it was a good idea. And tell us about that bill. Have you guys talked about the bill yet?
No,
We haven't talked
Yeah,
about
tell
it
us
yet.
about your bill, and it passed.
it did. It had a hearing today in the House and a House Committee on Ag, and 2 hours of testimony. I got to tell you, I was worn out. The emotional toll that it takes on these ranchers is tremendous. And I relived a lot of that. And a lot of them are my neighbors that were testifying there today. And it's tough to see grown men in tears and so emotionally shook up. Had a wife testifying today of, because her husband's gone, she's having to take over his duties, irrigating, taking care of all the kids' stuff. He's been to one baseball game this year. It can be a really tough thing. But the bill itself, this originated with taking a hard look at what was working, what wasn't. I was part of the negotiation that took place back in 2011 when we established our first wolf compensation program. Dennis Sheehy did a tremendous amount of work on that, and I want to give him credit. He drafted some of the first of that and was really creative. Dennis is a genius, and his work with large ungulates and predators all over the world, mostly in Mongolia in the United States, but he's very knowledgeable. But we got to a point where nobody was using the program anymore. In fact, the most saturated place in Oregon is the county that I'm from, Wallowa County. 6% of the ranchers were actually participating in the program anymore. It just wasn't working. I took a look at and visited with some of the other states that had compensation programs. And the one that I liked the best, that was working the best, was in Wyoming. And they had a multiplier. So if you got one calf killed, you got paid 7 times the value of that animal. And that seems like a lot. But we looked at the science behind that. And so even within the Oregon Wolf Conservation and Management Plan, it refers to the oak leaf study that took place over in Idaho. There was a Dr. Oakleaf that was over that study. They found 1 in 8 carcasses when they were on those large landscapes. So we used that science, and when there's 10 or 11 or 12 wolves in a pack, and they get into a 250-pound calf, there's nothing left. And I have a picture of some wolves. They took down a big cow of mine. A friend of mine put up a game camera and got these great pictures of wolves coming in and eating this cow, and he was all excited. He went back out the next day, and all he found was one hoof. And so the amount that they can consume, scatter, a lot of people say, well, you'll find something. But even in mature cows, sometimes you don't find anything. So we took that science there and tried to adapt it back and do away with some of the things that weren't working in the current wolf plan. And the thing that wasn't working very well, we weren't getting funded very well, and we didn't have participation was missing livestock. So in the current plan, we have a component. If you turn out and you come back with less cattle than you would normally come back with, we would, in a known wolf area, we would consider that those would be available for compensation. Well, it's impossible to prove that you have something missing. If it's actually in front of you, you can count it, you can assess it. But if it's gone, it's gone. It's hard to prove a negative. So we had OPB, they ran a big expose over in Baker County on one of the cattle ranchers over there that had tremendous loss. And I think he said he had lost 40 head. And it sounded extreme, and he didn't end up getting compensated for it. But OPB and the environmentalists said, "Oh, that's fraudulent. You know, this thing's getting misused." I wouldn't doubt that the guy was missing 40 head. I had a time when I was missing 20. We've seen here recently, again, somebody from Baker County that was running up in Wallowa County, 300 head, is missing 42. And he had 4 confirmed, and I asked some of the officials from ODFW. I said, "Do you think the 40 is legitimate? That he's actually missing that many?" They said, "Yeah, we think so." So it does happen. I stated a little earlier there was a guy over there in Idaho, and he had larger numbers. I think he was close to 1,000 head, but he was missing over 100. So it's the missing component is real. So when we put together Senate Bill 777, it was ironically, it had a 7 times multiplier. So that if you had 1 calf killed, you got paid 7 times the value. The environmental community that always says that they want to bridge the gap and want to keep ranchers happy and everything, they were vehemently opposed to that. So we went back.
Let me stop. Why were they so opposed to it?
That's a question for them. I can't answer on their behalf. I honestly just think that there's so many of them that are celebrating the return of the wolf, discouraging ranchers to the point that they go off of those federal landscapes. That's a victory for them. And so if they keep ranchers in business by compensating them with real money, that defeats their purpose. That's my own thought.
I think the other part of that is they see this compensation, the 7 times multiplier, as the ability to take, because they're nonprofits, they're getting government dollars somewhere to help them keep going, and the non-government organizations, they lose money. And it keeps, I think they really would like to, some of these far left groups would like to see farming go away and just have the land go back to the way it was when Lewis and Clark came through here, and that's just not going to happen. You guys we have to have a thriving economy and industry, and farming and ranching has been a stalwart within Oregon that it's just not going to go away. And every time there's a regulation put on the industry, the cattle industry, the farming industry, it's that would chip away at the ability for you guys to make a living and feed Oregon and feed the world.
Well, and plus, I mean, I don't know if you guys covered it while I was gone, but, you know, our provincial government in Oregon, which was formed in, I think, what was it, 1842?
41 or 42, yeah.
42, something like that, was because of wolves. Because wolves had so decimated cattle and were so dangerous, they got together to form a provincial government to basically try to get them the heck away from some of the settlements and things like that. And of course, our statehood came in 1859, but wolves have been around from the beginning, and of course the dynamic they pose on cattle, which you may have covered earlier about fertility rates.
Yeah, I
dropping.
just
We touched on it a little
started to get into that, but yeah. But I'll go back to 777. We ended up making some concessions on the bill. There's 5 amendments, and the -5 is what is ultimately going to go out. But we took that down to 5 multiplier. And so getting paid 5 times the value on yearlings, on calves, on sheep and goats, getting paid 3 to 1 on mature cows that are less likely to get killed and more likely to get found, 1 to 1 on horses, 1 to 1 on dogs that are generally in closer and you find them more often. And then on the original 2011 bill, we had in there that 30% of the money needed to be used toward non-lethal activity. And there was a lot of concern over that. And so I just suggested, look, do you want us to be partners on this? I wanted to take that argument away. I said, let's make it 50-50. And so we did that. And so those were the major concessions that we made on 777. I was really thankful for my Democrat and Republican colleagues alike voting that off the floor. I know that was uncomfortable for them. It was just the right thing to do. And the environmental community has embarrassed themselves over this, and they should be very embarrassed over it. Watching that testimony today, so emotional. And I would encourage people to go onto OLIS and watch that.
And of course, the bill passed the House 29-1. The bill does not do anything to wolves.
No.
It's just simply triggering, adjusting the wolf plan to say we need to compensate people who have paid the price for this agenda, whether you agree or not. It's caused real financial harm.
Yeah, and it actually doesn't even impact what is the Wolf Conservation and Management Plan. This is separate legislation, completely separate from that. So it doesn't have any impact whatsoever. It doesn't do anything toward more lethal take, any sort of control toward wolves whatsoever. What it does do is it encourages more ranchers to participate in the Wolf Conservation Plan, because you have to do some of those things within the plan in order to get compensated.
So, and yet their opposition in the hearing today was...
It's completely illogical.
Emotional and the wolves and all that. You just wonder what kind of propaganda they're being pushed.
I'll tell you the propaganda that's being pushed. I just pulled up the Oregonian and just kind of put in gray wolves. Published today, April 30th at 3:35 p.m. Gray wolf introduced to Colorado dies. It's in the environmental section. It popped up right on their page. Denver, a collared gray wolf released in Colorado in January as part of the state's historic reintroduction effort died in the Rocky Mountain National Park last week, wildlife officials said. Colorado Parks and Wildlife biologists received a mortality alert from a female gray-collared wolf on April 20th, later confirmed the wolf died in the park. State officials did not say how the wolf died, but said the death will be investigated by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service because gray wolves are protected under the Endangered Species Act. 3 paragraphs down, they had to say the wolf was not among those captured in Oregon and transplanted to Colorado. Rather, the wolf was identified as 2514 BC as one of the gray wolves captured in British Columbia. And it has happened in Colorado, but we're putting it in the Oregonian, picks that story up for whatever reason under the environmental section, because what you're talking about, the gray wolf, your 777 bill, that's just the fervor around the environmentalists that just want this dog, this hybrid, this thing that's killing people are killing with livestock and ruining industries and lives. But they glorify it that, it died. We don't know. But it wasn't one of ours that we sent to them. Whatever.
Did you see that one article where the super wolf, of ancient times, that they pulled out some DNA?
The dire wolf.
The dire wolf, and
yeah.
then they cloned it?
Yeah.
Right. And then I was looking at some of the statistics of the size of the dire wolf versus other wolves. And I'm like, talk about a supreme predator.
It's like the size of a lion.
I mean, it's amazing. And, I got to admit, on the one hand, my curiosity was, wow, that's amazing they can do that. Bring back
They're playing
extinct
God. They don't like
species.
that.
On the other hand, I'm going, oh my God.
It's Jurassic Park.
It's Jurassic Park in a way, mammal version. But, woolly mammoth. I mean, I was troubled by that. Like, this is getting into some real moral issues. And then, of course, one of the things that we don't know is what are the consequences? Not like these dire wolves are, going to escape and crossbreed and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. Someday, I suppose that's my son's problem or my daughter's problem and grandchildren. But in my lifetime, I doubt. However, what else are they doing? They're not telling us. And,
they're not
anyway.
telling us about the wolves that were in his area. They weren't truthful about that. And to your point, what else aren't they telling us?
What aren't they telling us? So 7. What do you think of the chances in the House? I mean, I got to believe they're going to move the bill.
Yeah, after watching that testimony, I don't know how you could vote against it. I just don't know how you would vote against it. I think the chances of it getting out of committee are 100%, and getting across the floor, I got to give it a 99.9.
If Speaker Fahey puts it on the floor, it's going to pass.
Yeah.
And, Julie Fahey, the Speaker of the House, a Democrat, but to a certain extent, she would get the value of Senate Bill 777, and why it's important to have a holistic approach, because no one group in Oregon should bear the cost of what is a whole state agenda. Again, whether you believe in the agenda or not, and folks are bearing the cost. In our district, our friends, I don't run cows, and but I tell you, it's pretty troubling when you think of how economically vulnerable a lot of our ranchers are to all sorts of things. How's cattle prices today?
They're good.
They're good today.
But
I did see the price recently, and I was like,
"Oh yeah,
wow.
yeah." The reason that it's good is we have fewer cattle in the United States than we have had in the last 70 years.
Are you kidding? 70 years.
70 years. We have put hundreds of thousands of ranchers out of business. And, people are really upset about what's going on with trade negotiations and tariffs, one thing or another. We have become a net importer of beef. We've become a net importer of lumber. We really need to take a strong look at what we're doing here. It's time that we take that back. Yeah. So the reason it finally caught up to us, the big packers, and love them or not, they control 85% of the cattle and beef industry. And we need them. We need them to be able to process. For a long time, there were ways that the market could be manipulated. We've just gotten to a point where there's not enough cattle out there, and that supply got so low that they're going to have to pay for them now. And like Painted Hills Natural Beef, this is a tough time for them.
Yeah.
Because there were margins before between the price of the cattle and price in the store. There's no margin there anymore.
Yeah.
And I feel really bad for those guys that are in the straight up beef industry. It's tough. It's a tough time.
I was talking with Will Homer, who runs Painted Hills out of Fossil, and recently just about how hard the margins are just because they're having to pay pricing. And, the stores are, you can see prices tick up, but they're not the percentage that the wholesale price of beef, the folks are having to. And Painted Hills is my favorite beef.
That T-bone.
Well, we have a T-bone bill. Have we talked about the T-bone bill?
I was thinking about it.
Todd Nash passed a bill this year, which is your next to 777, might be your most significant legislation.
Could be, yeah.
But
I am, I love that it promotes beef. I wanted it to be a win for the Cattle Women's Association.
It's a win.
And the Cattle Women do a fantastic job of promoting beef. They got those T-bones for us at the Ways and Means Roadshow. Yeah.
That was amazing. Yeah. And they were so huge, these T-bone steaks. And then Rep Ruiz, Ricky.
They average 2
He
pounds.
ate 2 of them.
Those steaks average 2 pounds a piece.
How did that? Because he's not like, I'm taller than he is, right? But he's young, So my hat's off to him. I lowered my fork in honor of him. At the end of the meal, he ate 2 T-bone steaks.
I was pretty proud of Ricky.
Well,
I high-five him when I see him in the halls now. I call him T-bone.
T-bone Ricky.
Yeah. And
Rep Ruiz.
What he's planning to do?
What?
He's planning to eat a T-bone steak on the floor when they vote on it.
All right. Good on Ricky.
Yeah.
Who's a Democrat from Gresham area and like that. But he was out there and he made it fun because people were damn near cheering him on as he was putting down the T-bone steaks. But then we got you haven't voted in the House yet on the Oregon's steak, the T-bone steak, and it's along with Oregon's vegetable is the potato.
Should be a ribeye.
Well, I'm not. I'm here with my colleague in the Senate, and I'm standing by T-bones.
Yeah, and I started out with ribeye. I that's where I was at. The first draft
was a ribeye.
Was a ribeye.
Well, that's my favorite.
And so
I've switched to T-bones now.
I know. And I've come around, with a lot of good reasons. The representation of having 2 sides and. And you heard the whole thing.
You're starting to sound like a county commissioner.
And so
it was a powerful speech he gave about how the one side of the T-bone is the ribeye and the other side is the strip.
Yeah,
that was powerful. But people were weeping.
I know. Yeah, but Gabrielle Homer, she was the one that really was. She said we need it to be T-bone, and so. I said, look, you go back to the Cattle Women, you vote on it, and if you guys vote T-bone, I am going to amend this bill. So the Cattle Women drove this thing, and it is going to be their win.
Well, hats off to her, and of course her husband Will that run Painted Hills, and they're doing yeoman's work. Yeah. But one thing before we sign off here, we've got to talk about cougars. Here's another example. The state of Oregon, passes this initiative, and it was
Measure 18 in 1994.
Yeah, and so to ban dog hunting for cougars to control predators, and we've had now there was a bill to allow counties to, instead of us paying to have predator control in counties, which was a cost we didn't have to pay before, but now we got to pay, again, statewide initiative. But again, between the cougars, the wolves, these are more predators. The cougar population, of course, has exploded. And
I sponsored that bill, and I had a hearing on it, 769. And at the time, We had over 800 pieces of testimony on OLIS. It was the most in the building.
Prior to David Brock Smith's bill.
Yeah, right.
Does he have a bill for that?
DBS crashed OLIS when he said, hey, no mail-in ballots, but prior to that, and we had a lot of people.
Yeah.
My daughter's boyfriend, who's a big avid hunter and fisher, one of the only questions he's ever asked me, since I've known this kid for a long time, is about your bill. And so it had all these young men fired up about it. Yeah. So it got a hearing, but didn't move.
No, it didn't move, and it was really unfortunate. Senator Golden chairs the committee. We had a long talk about it, and in the end, there was too much objection from the environmental community that he said within his own caucus that there wasn't a will for a single vote, and so I mean that is the difference in having the populace of Oregon vote on a management authority of a wildlife species that they don't understand. The minimum threshold, the minimum objective number for cougars in the state of Oregon is 3,000. We have over 7,000 now. They kill a deer-sized animal a week. So you do the math. It's over 300,000 deer-sized animals a year that are getting killed by cougars. We have 160,000 mule deer left in the state. The highest concentration of them are within towns. They've moved to town literally for safety.
Safe zone. Yeah. So 2 years ago, my wife shot a cougar. She was out elk hunting in Heppner, where you grew up. Or no, you grew up Condon.
I grew up in Heppner's suburb.
Oh, that's a suburb. That's right. It's the suburb.
It's about 48 miles away.
It's Representative Smith lives.
Yeah, Greg Smith
lives there. She shot a cougar. Well, Heppner was an area we hunted quite a bit, and they would bring in government hunters using dogs or helicopters and shooting cougars, and they took out somewhere. It was almost triple digits. It was in the high 80s to 90s cats out of there, and we saw the population of elk and deer go up. And then cougar repopulated. They had a good food source. And we would call in, do calf calls, hunting, archery hunting. I can't tell you how many cougars we called in. We would ride mountain bikes in on the old logging roads in there, and you're really quiet, riding a mountain bike in. And coming down, I remember watching a cougar jump in front of my bike, and I grabbed on the brake. I'm like, no, I just need to keep riding, and hopefully he doesn't decide to chase me. But you will see cougar out there all the time where you normally wouldn't, and because of the dogs. There was a hunter or a guy that used to have dogs out there, and now he's a government hunter. He talked about just how the cougar population is just exploded, and elk herds are down, deer herds are down. You talked about the mule deer. Well, the whitetail are down in population and everything else. Since we have cougars that walk through her dad's property up there in the Dalles. They show up. There was at a church in Hood River had a cougar hanging out of the tree. Yeah. So there's a problem.
Well, one of the government trappers, it was really interesting testimony, and he was down here in the valley, north of Eugene. He spent most of his time, but he said in all of his years, he trapped 2 cougars. He said the government trapper now, that's all he works on, is cougar depredation problems.
And cougars aren't a problem, but just a couple years ago in my district on Mount Hood, somebody decided to go from Portland or decided to go hiking and got killed by a cougar. Yeah. So they do interact with humans, and they will kill a human being.
Yeah. So we have, obviously the state of Oregon has made these policy choices for promotion of these incredible predators. We see deer, elk, other populations declining. So I guess, frankly, we got to ask the viewers, is this the Fish and Wildlife Department that you want? And is your money being spent the way you want? And that's why we have this podcast. to ask these questions, to go over the issues, let folks know what's happening, let them know about bills that aren't good, and of course, bills that are good. Which and hopefully we'll get it's 762.
769 was the Cougar
769.
bill. Yeah.
And I'd like to see that passed because I know that would allow counties to then issue.
Yeah, it's not going to go anywhere.
Not this year,
right.
but
yeah, we
hopefully.
we need to get that.
And eventually, I hope we will.
Yeah,
It just goes back to local control. If Multnomah County doesn't want to have the cougar population hunted by dogs or have whatever method to use, great. Multnomah County, have at it. Clackamas County, they may have a little bit of different story, but as you work eastward, I bet it changes.
Yeah, and I would imagine, and we haven't asked necessarily about Grant County, but, Tanner, I imagine it's a topic of when you grew up there, just not just wolves, but the cougars probably more so.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was about 12, just riding my bike and just, we only live 4 miles out of town, and just seeing a cougar on our property. And it's a pretty scary experience at 12. But, it's what you said about the mule deer only being 160,000 left. I mean, I don't know why our state continues to do the wrong thing and make it harder to do the right thing. So it's pretty concerning.
yeah, and it was double that in 1980. The mule deer population was double. There isn't a mule deer unit within the state of Oregon that is at objective level. They're all lower than what they want.
I'm sure if you asked folks on the left, they'd say, well, it's, hey, climate change,
Chronic wasting disease.
Trump.
Yeah, oh, yeah, it'd be
Yeah.
Trump's fault, yeah.
In other words, they always blame things that are not the obvious. There are predators and there are prey. And when you increase the predators, you decrease the prey, to a new equilibrium, right? And so, and my concern is the equilibrium hasn't been met yet, because if the cougar population continues to rise and thrive, we're going to see more numbers down. But the counties are having to spend money they didn't do before. And well, anyway,
Just to walk back to the former director of Oregon Fish and Wildlife, he gave a present. I was at a place where we both spoke, Kurt Melcher.
yeah.
He talked about cougars and depredation, and he goes, well, I'm trying to make it as easy as possible. You can get a cougar tag anytime. You shoot one, you can shoot another one. You can keep shooting until we reach our limit. But last time I checked, and I've gone out cougar hunting and used calls and things like that, it's where they find you, not where you find them.
Yeah.
And you can send as many tags out there, but it's kind of a happenstance. I have a tag. I'm out archery hunting. I shot one cougar, but jumped in front of me. I was going to shoot at my bow, and said I pulled out my pistol because I didn't want that thing coming at me. And I've had those cougar encounters, and they're scary. They're big.
They're big.
Yeah, it is a very difficult species to hunt without dogs. My son said, I think it was ratio-wise, tags to the number of animals that are actually harvested, it was the biggest spread in the United States. And so extremely hard to hunt without dogs. And we really need that tool back. Kurt Melcher, I consider him a friend. They did what they could.
Right.
We need to be able to fix Measure 18. And we fixed Measure 110 because there was a drug problem.
There's an outcry about it.
Right.
Yeah. And we need to be able to message this with mule deer and recovery of mule deer. We're going to see the same thing happen with elk. We're already seeing a decline in elk with the addition of wolves out there on the landscape. We're seeing a rapid decline. The Snake River unit, they basically gave unlimited cow tags in the Snake River unit. Today, they don't give away any. We are at a critical point where we're breaking on a number of species, and they move closer and closer into town, closer into our ag lands, and we need to do something about it. The department at some levels do have their hands tied, and us as legislators, we're up against it with a legislative body that doesn't understand, doesn't have the same lived experience. Senator McLane indicated you have 43% of the state. I have 17% of the land mass, 60% of the land mass with 2 senators. And that's what we're up against here. And,
Right.
and we have about 70% of the mule deer, maybe 80% of the mule deer, and probably about that of Rocky Mountain elk, maybe higher. And here we are trying to fight a battle that is pretty tough.
You know, I suppose the motivation for many of our colleagues who represent urban areas, was based on their constituents saying, "Hey, I'm tired of stepping over people who are drugged, in these induced whatever state, and the living quality by Measure 110 motivated them to say, we got to do something. This isn't working."
Right.
But, for those same colleagues to say, to get engaged and change the law, it takes more work because they're not getting pressured by their constituents. And, but we have to advocate, and you did a great job advocating. We got 777 passed off with a significant vote, a way higher margin I ever imagined. And so we're going to have to accept incremental change. But at least for this session, it's to get that bill out of the House and signed by the governor, and to get Ways and Means to fund that, put the money in. But
So I think the counter to the argument of 18 was, it was enacted by the voters. We have to have the will of the voters. Well, when I was the House leader, I heard the same thing about Measure 110, but we still did it because it was the right thing to do.
right.
Right.
And so it can be done if there's the internal fortitude to make it happen.
Yeah, and that's true. Mike said, I think you summarized it well. It's just what you're impacted by. And if you don't see the decline of mule deer, where Tanner lived, that happened really fast, the decline of mule deer in that area.
Mm-hmm.
20 years ago, there were mule deer all over the place.
Cougars really affected
Yeah.
Grant County.
Yeah. And they shifted into town overnight, and that was the last of them. They were all gone.
Yeah.
In fact, ODFW owns a large property down there that they bought just for mule deer recovery. They did one survey there and didn't find a single mule deer on it.
Well,
That's it.
good podcast. Thank you all. Look forward to the next agency. Thank you, Tanner, for doing the research. And we'll see you next time.